So hello and welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us in this webinar series. To open this event, I would like to briefly introduce why we have created this cycle of conferences. In the past few decades, the idea of rhythm has consistently gained academic interest. Its pervasiveness in social life has triggered a multidisciplinary concern among scholars from a wide range of disciplines, including cultural geography, anthropology, psychology, dance, performance, literature, drama, and music. Within this scenario, studies of rhythm have proved to be analytically productive. It allows us to understand the temporal and spatial unfolding of human practices and to explore how those dimensions are used by people. Research on rhythm have demonstrated to be fruitful to further develop understandings about bodily empathy, mobilities, exchange, identity, and the production of space and time. It has also shown to be crucial for exploring and understanding the intersections of natural and biological cycles with linear ones, and therefore a key entry to the study of everyday life. Nevertheless, besides the above potentials and existing multidisciplinary interest, we still lack spaces where those contributions and ideas are brought together. In this sense, the aim of this webinar cycle is to contribute in overcoming such a shortage by bringing together scholars from different institutions and disciplines, and to offer a place where we can discuss, learn, perform, and share our reflections and research revolving around rhythm. We hope that this event and the ones coming in the next future will contribute in the formation of a network of people researching on the topic of rhythm, who are currently lacking dialogues and opportunities for sharing their perspectives. During this week, every day between 3 and 5 p.m., you will be able to join a new webinar. On Friday, we will start a bit early at 2 p.m. Almost every webinar will include the participation of one anthropologist and one dancer or performer. Thus, we will have the opportunity to engage with people that either from the observation or from actively using body rhythms have important ideas to share. The structure of the webinars will be as follows. During the first 30 to 45 minutes, we will listen to our first presenter, followed by a round of Q&A. After that, we will pass to our second presenter, again with 30 to 45 minutes from the presentation, followed by a round of Q&A. To ask your questions, please raise your hands or use the chat box. All these webinars are going to be recorded, so if you prefer, you can disconnect your camera and you won't be recorded. Today, we are happy to open this cycle with the participation of Dr. Jo Vergunst and Jorge Poveda. Dr. Jo Vergunst is currently head of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Aberdeen. He has made important contributions to the understanding of people's relationship with time, heritage, space, mobilities, and everyday life. And we feel deeply honored and fortunate to have him here. Regarding rhythm, he has pushed further the debate, both in terms of theory and of practice. In this line, his discussions about the ethnographic encounter and the role of rhythm in shortening the distance between the observer and the observant is highly remarkable. Jorge Poveda, our second speaker, is a young scholar who is beginning his academic career. Without his energy and motivation, this event would not be happening. Thus, all the credits should be directed to him. Jorge was trained in laws, and his affinity with arts had pushed him to look closer at the intersection of bodily practices, authenticity, ownership, and copyrights. Recently, he received an MA in anthropology of dance, where he explored the usages of indigenous dances by non-indigenous people, and the role of rhythm in advancing further tools that help to protect indigenous bodily practices. We sincerely appreciate your participation, and we hope that the following webinars are of your interest. We will now pass to Dr. Jo Vergunst's presentation. Dr. Jo, welcome and thank you very much for accepting this invitation.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisco, and Jorge as well. And it's really nice to be able to say hello to a really interesting bunch of people. Looking through the plan for the week, it sounds like it's going to be a really great series of events, and I think it's really appreciative of the opportunity to be able to explore some of these aspects of rhythms that I've been thinking about for some time in my work, but perhaps not as much as I could have done, as much as I'd like to. And I think there's a lot to be said for more conversation on the topic. Now, I'm going to do my best to present this material in a fairly informal way, so I'm really happy to get people's comments and thoughts as we go ahead. Please, Jorge or Francisco, if there's something that we should pause for, absolutely fine, no problem at all. I'm really looking forward to hearing people's thoughts on this as we go through. If I mess up the technology, I'm sorry. Okay, keep with me. We'll be okay. We'll get through it together. But yeah, I think you can see my my title screen there. So I'm listening to the radio last week, just in the kitchen in the morning, and there's a person from National Trust for Scotland who is talking about the process of reopening their historic properties and their landscapes here in Scotland. And he says, people have experienced the most extraordinary situation over the last few months. And yeah, that just seemed to sum things up for me. When I heard that, I thought, yeah, there's something in that. But it's a challenge because for me, most of my fieldwork and research as an anthropologist has been on the specifically ordinary, not the extraordinary. So I'm kind of, I find it difficult. I'm a little bit unsure. I'm not very comfortable in dealing with the extraordinary in life. So I tend to look at the patterns of everyday experience rather than the moments of change. But I've started to ask myself about that shift between the ordinary and the extraordinary. How does each happen in the other, in relation to the other? So how can an artwork, for example, and I'm become interested in working with and through creative practice as well, how can an artwork sometimes depict something totally ordinary and yet at the same time somehow be extraordinary as well? And so one of the examples that I use in my work, sometimes maybe you're familiar with this, is Richard Long's photograph, but of his own performance. It's really a sort of document of his performance of walking in a straight line through this field in Kent in the south of England for 2 hours, I think it was. And then he simply took a photograph afterwards. So we have a record of just an extremely sort of simple, as it were, set of gestural movements, a sort of movement through the landscape that creates a line that he then took a photograph of, kind of extraordinary and yet ordinary. It's that shift that I'm hoping we can explore this afternoon for a minute or two. But my interest in rhythms then comes from, I guess, this kind of situation, exploring people's relationships with their environments where they live. In the work I've done on walking, has explored people's sensory perceptions, their ways of being sociable, being together in a particular environment, and also the politics of movement, politics of access and planning and control over the land, and so on. Rhythms were actually quite a key part of this ethnographically. People simply often talk to me about their positive experience of being in a rhythm as they walked, which was a way of saying, I think that the walk was going well, that this is something they enjoyed and they appreciated about a walk. They knew it was going well when they were feeling like they were in a rhythm. So rhythms can be disrupted, of course, as well. So on the street, perhaps by traffic lights, by other pedestrians or obstacles, or in the countryside, in rural settings, maybe by uneven or difficult ground, or by losing the way as well. And yet for some people in the city, that kind of sense of bustle and togetherness, that kind of rhythm of the whole traffic and the whole scene, that sort of meta rhythm is something that some people appreciate as well. Of course, but analytically, thinking about rhythm helped open up forms of sociability, the sort of simple pleasures of being with another person in distinctive ways. The way that a conversation happens as you walk along has distinctive qualities to it. And so this was also the case in my fieldwork that I've kind of kept going over the whole time I've been an anthropologist in rural areas and in places like Orkney as well. I did my doctorate fieldwork up in Orkney, and again looking at people's ordinary relationships with the landscape as they were going about their business, as they were making plans for the future and building on the past in particular kinds of ways. So that's just a sort of a sense of where I've come from, the kind of work that I've done as an anthropologist. A little bit more conceptually, I hope my I don't know if you can see the whole quote or not, or whether I'm kind of hidden behind a group of people. Maybe that's just the way that my screen is. But a couple of conceptual points that are just to flag up in terms of how I'm exploring rhythm in my work is that a rhythm isn't a repetition. And I like this distinction that Henri Lefebvre draws between repetition, or in this case, mechanical repetition, and the idea of rhythm. So just briefly, he says, while mechanical repetition works by reproducing the instant that precedes it, rhythm preserves both the measure that initiates the process and the recommencement of this process with modifications, therefore its multiplicity and plurality. So in other words, the sort of key aspect of rhythm here is the possibility for difference, for improvisation, for change and responsiveness to circumstances. And in Lefebvre's work, more generally, for those of you who might be familiar with it, he's drawing contrasts here between the sort of capitalist process of control, sort of bureaucratic control over senses of time and space, and the possibility for rhythms to provide a counterpoint to that. But then a sort of second aspect of rhythm that I'm interested here in which I haven't been able to find a sort of nice quote to sum up at this point, but when I get back in the office, then I will do. But just the idea of rhythm as a means of creating places and forms as well. And it's also something that Lefebvre is interested in, but that sense in which spaces, place is actually are actually made by the kinds of gestures, the kinds of activities that people have in them. But then also, of course, rhythm can create particular material forms as well. And so I'm building on some of my colleague Tim Ingold's work here on making, basket weaving and so on, and carpentry that I've been involved in as well, where the actual material form is created by a rhythm of work that takes place here. So the kind of skills that get involved in that kind of rhythm making, I think all of which are actually really relevant to the way that I'm thinking about walking and bodily movement. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is try and make connections between all of that and our experiences over the last few months in this lockdown moment. And so I'm talking from, I don't know if we've got an international audience here. I suspect we have to some extent. So I'm talking about our circumstances here in Britain and in Scotland in particular, where we have been able to go for a daily walk. And for much of lockdown, it's been one piece of exercise allowed outdoors every day. So this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. Right, I'm going to try and do something clever then with my screens and give you a little bit of radio if I can, which is now not going to come up. course, I can't find my internet, which is too bad.
Is it sorry to interrupt you, is it a disconnection from the Wi-Fi network, or is it a problem with the Zoom platform?
I'm just wanting to share my internet, my browser, which I had when we were just talking a few minutes ago, but now, of course, I can't find it on my list of screens to share. This one doesn't matter too much because I can come back to it.
Would you like to stop the screen, sharing your screen and then sharing it back again so that maybe we can make that video available?
Can we try that? Thanks, folks. I'm going to stop and then try and get back in.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay.
And so I think now we don't have, we are not sharing any screen, and you should retry the option now by picking that particular window.
It's not coming up on my list of windows to share. Hang on. There we go.
Yes, we can see it now.
I knew this was not going to work terribly well. Okay, then the next thing is whether the sound is going to work. So we'll give it a shot, shall we? No, but I want this one. Okay, so this is going to take about 3 minutes, but there's a person on the radio she's actually another presenter on the radio. She's talking about her lockdown walk. So this is a narrative that somebody has of their daily walks in Glasgow here in Scotland. So we'll give it a try. If it doesn't work, I've got the text on the next screen.
Hi, I'm Shona Aitken and I present Jazz Nights on BBC Radio Scotland on Sunday evenings. I live in Finnieston, which is sandwiched between the city centre and the west end of Glasgow. And so my daily walks during lockdown have quite an urban landscape. Look at me, I'm being forced to stay in your own area wasn't really a problem for me, as I knew there was so much to explore. I kind of treated it as if I was on holiday and got to know the area on foot. You know, the way that you walk for hours if you're discovering a city such as Rome or Venice. So I found lots of intriguing hidden lanes behind the tenements in Finnieston. Some of them dead ends, but still good to find that out for myself. And I always challenged myself to take different routes to Kelvingrove Park, where I would come across compact apartments nestled in amongst the tenement buildings, or I'd bump into a wee cat and make a new friend, and just get a feel generally for how people would decorate their minimal city spaces with window boxes and other things. Even seeing how the weeds have grown along some of these more secluded lanes and out on the beaten track, I must say, has really brightened up my walks. There's just lush wild greenery and colourful flowers that you don't normally see. At the beginning of lockdown, my favourite route was to walk up the north side of the Clyde to the Transport Museum and the Tall Ship. I ventured a bit further one day up to the Glasgow Harbour Flats and met the swans that live by the river, and every day pretty much since then I've seen them at some part on the river. I found another path with murals painted under a bridge, so I followed that and was interested to find that this path brought me up to the back of the Kelvin Hall. So it's great to see how everything is connected, as I'm usually travelling about by car and I just miss all of that. As a musician, you'll not be surprised to hear that my walks always have a soundtrack. I plug in my headphones and that keeps me company, as well as drowning out the sound of the city, the car engines, the fire sirens, and now construction noises have begun again. But sometimes I'll listen to new releases for my radio show, or pick an artist such as jazz singer Betty Carter and get to know her vocal style a bit more, and also check out some friends' new albums. And I was recently blown away by Gabby Mass and Alice Allen's The Curlew, which is a beautiful collection of Scottish and Scandinavian tunes played on violin, nyckelharpa and cello, and just a perfect uplifting soundtrack to my trails around Glasgow.
Okay, now I'm going to try and get back into my other one. I think I'm going to have to stop sharing again and then go back into my PowerPoint. Oh no, here we go. Let's share that. Okay, are you back into my PowerPoint again? Yeah, great. Okay, so that was a tip. So and before. Okay, so that was what the presenter was just saying there. If you wanted to follow that, for me, what's interesting here is that the ordinary walks are gaining prominence here. We're reflecting on this completely ordinary, everyday practice in ways that we wouldn't do normally. So the walk is what we can do, in amongst all of this disruption. We can take our daily walk. And so we do it and we invest meaning in it. But some of these walks have really captured the limelight too. And people in the UK will be familiar with these kinds of things. The story of Captain Tom, elderly gentleman who wanted to walk up and down his garden as a fundraising, a charity fundraising activity, which of course went viral and raised millions and millions of pounds for charities for the NHS. And another running app, another running online kind of viral challenge thing that went viral as well. I think with Captain Tom's walk, it's almost like a universal walk for all walkers. This sort of ultimate idea of a sort of purist walk. He's not going anywhere. He's not doing anything. It's simply walking. Of course, it gets. It gets it's for charity, so there's a kind of financial, a sort of moral element, but the walk that doesn't have a destination, that is just the rhythm of movement in and of itself, somehow seems interesting in all of this. I'm not really sure what to make of it all, but just to sort of highlight this kind of material at the moment. So I've not conducted an ethnographic project here in any traditional sense, but I've started from where I am, with myself, with the people around me, with the people that I meet and I've met. And I'm definitely interested, as I said, in thoughts and any other contributions to all of this. I haven't used much in the way of social media to follow on. To follow all of this stuff. I really just started with my own self, and there's something interesting there, I think, in also in terms of what Henri Lefebvre talks about in his book Rhythm Analysis. And I'm remembering this because it's another one that's in my office, so I haven't read for a long time. But he has the part where he's sitting at his desk, looking out the window, and he's just starting with his own internal rhythms, and he creates a kind of psychoanalysis, if you like, of himself, and then works outwards into the rhythms of the environment from there. And that's kind of what I have in mind with this kind of thing. I kept a diary. I kept a sort of walking diary for a few weeks around the early and the sort of peak lockdown. So we were doing these small circuits for an hour or two a day, sometimes around the streets, past a shop, sometimes to the woods, along the river, park, and so on. For a while, we had our favorite areas where the boys here could play for a little bit, down by the river, and a place where there's a nice bench we could sit on. And I found places that were newly available on foot or on bike, because it's so quiet. So roads that you wouldn't normally cycle along because they're really, really busy, or places that you wouldn't really walk because it's not nice because they're so busy, become available. And I think this is actually a really important theme here of things that we might want to hold on to somehow, this kind of experience of our environments that actually we might want to maintain, to make a way of sustaining some of the experiences that have been possible here, that actually previously weren't available at all. So this is this is an old railway line near where we are on the edge of Aberdeen here, and actually people have what you're looking at on the platform there is a line of painted stones. I don't know if these are, I know they're down in other places as well to some extent, but they've started off here, and someone's started off with a stone that says it's a rock snake, and people are invited to leave their own stones but not disturb the ones that are there. And there must be a couple of hundred of them now that are all lined up on the platform there. Just little designs and colours and rainbows and things like that. So this is the sense of the everyday that I'm interested in here. There are other accounts too. I'm not going to go to the YouTube one for this one, but the charity Living Streets, campaigning organisation Living Streets, presents Rita from Liverpool here, who since lockdown started, she's been going on daily walks with her husband to try and improve her health, and she talks about the kind of benefits that she finds in enjoying her local park, seeing other people, positive effects on her health. Yeah, my friend up in Orkney says that people are having conversations with each other a lot more, which I've noticed as well. I find it quite funny because people in Orkney are constantly talking to each other, and the idea that they're talking to each other even more is kind of funny. But actually having those conversations is interesting, and maybe feeling the need to be connected with each other and actually concerned with one another as well. So in all of this stuff, there's the idea of walking as a kind of personal project here, the creation of a rhythm, a daily rhythm of local movement around routes and around circuits. Did you hear how the person on the radio had that sense of exploration as well, of finding new routes, and that kind of improvised element to the walk, I think, is quite interesting here, in amongst these very positive messages about the moralities of walking. So what happened to me was, again, sort of starting with myself here, was that over the weeks I actually lost this kind of habit. I started getting really stressed. Work started getting really overwhelming. I lost my sense of routine. I couldn't keep up with my kids' homeschooling. I was trying to look after, my whole family. My wife's needs some help as well sometimes. And I lost the habit of keeping the field notes going as well, because I think I fell out of that rhythm. Everything got a bit overwhelming, and I picked up on, I think, other people. There seems to be a bit of a mood of people who have actually maybe started lockdown with good intentions, but actually found it really difficult. A couple of conversations that I'm going to recount to you showed this to me as well, that rhythm actually can be disrupted as well. So I met another a mother with her kids who I know through the kids' school, and she was sitting on her 3 kids with a bench with drinks by the river, looking relaxed in the sun, but she wanted to talk about how hard she was finding life, how hard she was finding homeschooling in particular. She was feeling under pressure, not able to understand all the schoolwork herself. She didn't have enough technology for her children. She didn't want to shout at her kids, she said to me. She reckoned there were other parents who couldn't actually read enough to help their kids with their work either. Another conversation I had with an old friend of mine who's a manager for a set of care homes locally, and all he could really say was that work had been really difficult, and I'm sure it must have been totally overwhelming for him. What I thought about those kind of conversations were that actually the walk was a kind of respite, that possibility of being able to remove oneself from these difficulties and these kind of traumas, really, that they were having, not simply for exercise or fresh air, but as a kind of response, a rhythm that was a response to the difficulties in other parts of their lives. Now, let's maybe go back a slide. Sorry, am I going to go back a slide? It might seem that the walks that I'm talking about here are extremely repetitive, going around the same narrow series of routes every day. Maybe some of you folks have had similar experiences over the last few weeks, starting and ending from home in a very repetitive way, often at the similar time of day for a similar amount of time as given to us by the guidelines of the government that we're living under. Yeah, this is not my argument. What I'd like to say is that for people who walk regularly, even in these kind of circumstances that we're talking about, I think they're not repetitions. They're more like accumulations. They're more like an extra layer of experience every time that the walk takes place, of sociability, maybe of exercise, engagement with a local place and landscape. So what I found when I was doing the longer term field work with walking was that people are noticing those small changes in the environment as they take place. That change in relationships, the building of relationships that take place amongst people. So this is the way that a rhythm is created. Each walk is not repeating the previous one, but is adding to it. Is like a sort of layer that builds up in experience. At least that's the way I'm thinking about it at the moment. So it's a continuation and an improvisation. Even looking at these photographs now, I'm noticing the change of the season. So it's April. Early spring, the daffodils, there's no leaves on the trees yet, and this was yesterday or something where where it's now, and so to follow those changes, I think, happens when you're engaged in that kind of way. So thinking about this in more detail, and I hope this is not going to feel like a tangent, but through an art project that I took part in, I was lucky enough to take part in, by the artist Hamish Fulton, who bases his art on his walking practice. Often he goes out to rural or wilderness or mountain areas and constructs a sort of a 2-week or a month-long walk in the wilderness. But he does urban walks as well. And for this particular walk, he set us the task of walking around this block in the small town of Huntly in Aberdeenshire here in Scotland. And we had to be evenly spaced apart, not talk to each other. We had to walk for 2 hours as a kind of meditative practice. And it was very interesting to me. I really enjoyed it, but it was really hard work and it was tiring, and I felt kind of dizzy as well, turning the corners all the time. But actually, that's where, in a very concentrated form, that idea of accumulation, of building up experience rather than repeating it, through a sort of rhythm of walking, began to make sense to me. Now, so that's the first point about rhythm I'd like to make, and then in the last 5 minutes, I just want to make my second point about rhythm, which is about again drawing on Lefebvre's rhythm analysis. He has a chapter on dressage, and by this he's talking about training. He's talking about the way that humans, as you say, learn to hold themselves. So how we learn particular rhythms, and actually how we can kind of control each other by them as well. And for this one, I haven't got any great photographs, unfortunately. I'll go back to this one because it's got some people in. But the gestures of being near each other and yet distanced from each other are really, really significant. So it feels like a social obligation, a desire to be sociable. So you haven't seen someone for a long time, so you want to be close to them. But of course, you have a requirement to be apart. And so noticing those distanced conversations on the street, maybe 3 or 4 people together but apart. Saying hello when you walk by somebody here is it's become much more common. People in where I live here on the edge of Aberdeen would do that sometimes, but not normally. But through the lockdown, people were much more sociable in that respect, and it almost felt like a kind of apology for, or recognition, that you had to be 2 meters away from someone, so someone would have to step out into the road or stop and let you go by. I started thinking about this when I noticed how quickly the 2 boys here, my 2 kids, were learning that. So they really quickly, maybe they'd see people and say, no, Daddy, we can't go this way, we'll go that way because there's people up there, and they picked up on it really themselves. And I never really told them to do that, but they had that kind of gestural learning experience here. Now, my final point about this is this is not always a positive experience, and it can be difficult. And so I think the kind of social politics and the sort of space politics here is where some of this is going. I had a really interesting conversation with a student of mine here in Aberdeen who was writing in one of his assignments about where he lived, where he was locked down, and he was finding that his local area was getting really over busy with walkers and cyclists and so on, and that his local rhythms of walking had been totally disrupted by this influx of people who were taking their daily exercise, and so there was conflict on a very local level there as well. And that kind of difficulty of getting outdoors, I think, is also reflected in the final piece that I wanted to share, if I've still got a minute or two to do that. So I'm going to try and be clever here with the technology one more time, if you'll just be patient with me, and we'll try and make this work. And so this final example is about people who are maybe are actually not accessing the outdoors, and it's just reflecting on a Scottish government mental health campaign that's been running in the context of coronavirus, of course. And this particular one is about the fear of going outside. So I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to go to Firefox. I'm going to share that, but I'm going to where is it? It's underneath my tabs and I can't get to it. Oh. Oh. Okay, hang on a second again. Okay. Now I hope that, yeah, I've got a thumbs up from Jorge, so we'll give this a shot. This is a really, really short one, so hopefully this will work as well. So this is an advert that was on the telly a week or two ago here in Scotland.
We've all been making a huge effort to stay at home, so you might feel a bit anxious about going out more. Taking a number of slow, deep breaths can really help to clear your head. Remember, even though you're keeping apart from others, you can still say hello. Noticing nature wherever you are helps too. For more ways to feel calmer about going outside during the coronavirus outbreak, visit clearyourhead.scot. We've all been making...
Stop. Okay, so stop. What I thought was really interesting about this, just before I leave it, was that this was actually just a way of a way, was advertised, not quite advertising, but just encouraging this totally ordinary activity. So this was in the, I saw it, we watched it when we were watching the football, and it was an advert break, and there was kind of car adverts and insurance and all this kind of serious stuff. And then in the middle of it was just this advert for taking a deep breath and going outside and being able to speak to one's neighbors. And it just seemed that this was advice on how to be ordinary, which was in its own way, of course, extraordinary that was where we were. So I'm gonna go back into my PowerPoint now. Okay, then I'm going to conclude in my last minute, and then I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone's got to say. So sorry if I've been going on a bit. To have said, people have experienced the most ordinary situation over the last few months. So, and perhaps that would have been just as meaningful, but not such good radio. I've started wondering about sort of hyper ordinary or something. That situation in which the very, what is it that's ordinary, that itself is the subject of concern and debate. So those very normal moments, and where the ordinary rhythms and the gestures of everyday life are brought into question. And this is where my interest in the everyday is, or the ordinary is, what is commonly hidden in plain view, what we normally don't get the chance to reflect on. I think mobility studies are really good at this. That actually can, and this is, I think, what the pandemic has done as much as anything else, making the everyday significant again, revealing the rhythms of everyday life, in which we can sort of get hold of something that we appreciate as well. So there's lots of other ways that we could possibly take this, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts. But I'm gonna just hold it there. I think with that sense of what the pandemic is doing is actually revealing some of these rhythms of everyday life that we have. And that's it. Thanks for listening. I hope the technology's been okay.
Thank you so very much, Jo. I'm sure that a lot of the ideas that you explain are resonating among us, the rest of the participants. So I am going to encourage people in here connected to use the option that it's available within Zoom to raise your hand, because now we are going to be passing to the Q&A section of this talk. And so you can search for that option within the bottom. If you click the button that says participants, and then at the very bottom of that list, you should be able to find the raise my hand option. If you don't find that option and you have a different software running, maybe you can profit from the chat box, so that if you feel like we are not being able to see your hand, you can just drop a message in there, and we can just allow you to go ahead with your question. And so, Jo, sorry to ask you this. Is it possible for you to please go click the participants button and then right click on my name, and can you please make me the host again? Yeah, I don't know, for a strange reason I couldn't find that option in here, which was available a second ago. Yes, thank you. So I think now we have 2 hands raised and 5 people that I'm about to admit for the Q&A. So let's see. Sorry, I cannot see the person that is raising their hand. So can you please go ahead and just unmute yourself and shoot your question? And thank you.
How do we start? Who starts first?
Is it, who's talking right now? Is it Alexandra Balandina?
Yes, it's me.
Great, thanks for coming and getting connected. So please go ahead with your question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jo, for the very interesting discussion. Just a general question, whether there is something you would like to mention about the soundscape during these walks, and whether the soundscape, there is something ordinary and extraordinary about the soundscape during the lockdown.
Thank you. Yeah, great question, good points. And what I really appreciated is this multi-sensory experience that again is so totally ordinary, just the sounds of the environment. I thought it was quite interesting though, listening to the person on the radio who has done it all with her headphones and with music, and has created her own soundscape. And in that sense, you know, is wanting to block off the sounds of the city. But I think there's been so many people who've appreciated the quietness, you know, those roads that are not totally overwhelmed. And for me, this actually becomes a really political point as well, in terms of thinking about, you know, what do we want our environments to be like? You know, what kind of places do we want to live in? How can we make our environments actually more livable? And I think the sounds that we're immersed in are totally important to that. You know, the possibility in many of these places to have a conversation, it's just not there most of the time because it's so noisy. You just can't do it. And so I think those elements of sound are really important in how the lockdown has happened, at least in the kind of setting that I'm talking about here, at least.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Great. So now we can go ahead, please, with Ilan Morris.
Hi, Jo, and everyone. Thank you so much. It was really, really lovely to hear you talking about the walks, and made me quite nostalgic for Scotland as well. One of the things that it made me think about in my own experience of walking around the neighbourhood here in Leeds, and about this, what feels to me a bit like a paradox of how we have this kind of habitual and repetitive experience, and how sometimes it feels like I would expect the repetition to lead to a sort of numbing of experience, but then it seems to create more depth as well. Like I hear things, I see things that I haven't seen, or I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't been restricted. So I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that sense of repetition and how sometimes it's a numbing experience and sometimes it's a deepening, and what you think is contributing to that.
I'm a bit worried about pushing my own argument too far on this one, because I think there's something really important about recognizing the possibility of rhythmical action in these kind of walks that we're talking about here, and the way that depth can be created and that people do connect, because I see it and people have talked to me about it, and I kind of believe it, and yet I don't know, I think it's over the last month or so, I've just been kind of totally overwhelmed by stuff, and I've just lost that. I feel like I'm not tuned in anymore to that rhythm. I've lost my rhythm of that, and just trying to keep everyone, you know, healthy and happy has just been so difficult, really. That you know, and this, it also has brought home to me the very different circumstances, the diversity of circumstances that people are in. So people who have been shielding, people who are disabled and find it hard to access the outdoors anyway. There's an artist who I work with, Alec Finley, who has a disability himself and has reflected in really interesting ways about the problems of movement, and the difficulties of these kind of circumstances. So I'm getting kind of a bit wary of my own argument of the kind of ideal rhythm and engagement and depth kind of thing, because it can be so difficult and it can be challenged in so many different ways. But maybe what's nice about the argument is that it opens that up as a question for us to reflect on and to think about, I guess. So that's where I'm at with it at the moment,
Okay.
at least.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. And now, please, Nina, welcome. Nina Davies, you can go ahead with your question, please.
Hello. So I just had a question. Maybe this is sort of something that you were addressing all along, and maybe I just sort of missed it. But I was sort of wondering, when I was really interested in sort of just like how you're generally interested in the ordinary, and how that sort of, you know, we keep talking about going back to sort of like the new, or like going back to normal. And maybe I'm saying this, sorry, that might have been me. I don't know what that was. But what was I? Sorry, where was I?
Going back to a new normal.
Yeah,
thing,
and
yeah.
sort of like what suddenly realizing now we're in this state where actually like we've gone back to like sort of the original ordinary, and what was the old ordinary now seems kind of extraordinary. And I might be saying this from living in London, where my old ordinary was this like hyper rhythm of like trains and all these other things. And I was sort of wondering whether you thought about these sort of like the sort of ordinary and its binary relationship with each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's really nice, and it's really important to I think this is the whole point with the why I'm interested in, you know, the anthropology of the everyday and the anthropology of the ordinary, that we're not kind of seeking the exotic, you know, the kind of radical other, but actually we are entirely, you know, we have to be always open to that, because, you know, all of the experiences of everyone who's on the call here are probably really, really distinctive. And so actually what I found really interesting about the whole sort of pandemic thing is that it's now in question. You know, we now get to say, well, what is the ordinary? What ordinary do I want? What do I want my new normal to be if the old one was problematic? And I think many of us would probably agree that in many cases it was very problematic, and you know, for all kinds of purposes. And I would even go as far to say that you know, some of the conversations, not least that we've been having here at the University of Aberdeen about racism and anti-racism and so on, you know, it's raising that same question of what is the ordinary experience that people you know, in society, in this country, wherever we're talking about at the moment in Aberdeen, we're reflecting on that really strongly in our university as a group of medical students drew attention to the appalling kind of discourse and circumstances they're faced in their ordinary work. And so, you know, it just seems to be a moment to reflect on those kind of circumstances and to say to each other, well, you know, let's do it better. You know, let's go when we are going back. Is the normal in London what it should be? I mean, maybe it's kind of inevitable, and it's not to say that these things can be easily changed, but to raise that, I think, is a really powerful thing that that we can do in these kind of circumstances. Not sure that's quite what you're getting at, but that's my initial response, at least.
Thank you.
Great. So does anybody else has a question? I think I will benefit from that because I have a question for Jo. I think we don't. Oh, we do have someone else. So please, Stephanie Ellison, go ahead.
Hi, Jo. I wanted to thank you so much for doing this. It's been really great. And I don't know if it's a question as much as just sort of an insight that you've provided for me, which is just some of the artists that you've mentioned and the artwork. It just kind of seems, you know, it sort of also brought to mind just works by like John Cage, like his 4 minutes and 33 seconds, or like some of the work of Donald Judd, out in Texas, you know, his boxes that are in the landscape. It seems like right now is a really good opportunity to present works, not in a museum, but by artists who are looking at their relationship to the environment and sort of orienting us to our space. And I just hadn't really put that together, but it seems like this is a good time for that.
I hope it is. I hope it is because there's so much fabulous work going on. In the it's not, I don't know, is it but just based in the UK or not? But there is if you're interested in some of that, there is a walking artists network that you can. It's kind of gone up and down in terms of how active it's been, but I do have many critiques of some of the walking stuff, the walking artwork, including the pieces that I showed. Sometimes it gives the impression of a kind of heroic walker heading out into the landscape to be amazing by themselves and do something incredible. But actually, some of the more interesting work is collaborative, and it does reflect on things like gender and participation and collaboration and so on as well. So there's actually a whole range of stuff there. And I think that the opportunities for outdoor stuff must be pretty good. So I don't really know what they're all up to at the moment. I know one of the guys I mentioned, Alec Finley, he's actually doing work on disability access to the outdoors at the moment, but is constrained himself in his circumstances in how far he can do that at the moment. So it's a really, really nice theme, and if anyone's interested in that, then I'd be really happy to stay in touch as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Francisco, you have a question too, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Jo. We're deeply honored for your participation. There is a question that someone wrote in the chat, which is how different would it be to understand rhythms of non-humans, animals, more than humans, other than humans, or as you want to call that, and also specifies that Lefebvre's conception of rhythm analysis was postulated for the human body. So how could this be extended to other bodies? And adding to that question, I think that perhaps what I feel one of the most important elements of rhythm is this kind of in-between category, which allowed us to respond, to resonate with other phenomena. So I think that, yeah, just to add that to that question.
Yeah, I think that's the beginning of a really nice response there. Thank you, Francisco, and thank you for the question, Shruti. I think that was a really, really nice question, very nicely formulated as well. I don't really have a clear sense of that, but I really like that concept that you were just saying there, Francisco, of resonance, the way in which a rhythm is not just internal to a single body, but is actually a relationship, an interaction with an environment or with others around it, and in that sense, there might be the beginning of an answer there, that we might look at the relational capacities of rhythms. The student who I mentioned towards the end, who's having trouble in their locality with too many people walking, actually drew attention to dogs, and actually the very different rhythms of movement that a dog might have to a person, for example, where they're not kind of keeping to those sort of strict rules. And yesterday, me and the boys watched a cyclist get knocked off his bike nearly by a horse as well, who was coming the other direction, which was quite dramatic. And so it's these moments where the rhythms can kind of coincide and work together, and then the moments where they diverge as well. And finally, in the Scottish Government mental health advert that we watched towards the end there, that sense of noticing nature, of being involved in the surroundings from that perspective might open up a kind of more than human angle on the subject as well. That's a really nice question. I'll certainly think a bit more about that as well.
Great. So I think with that question, I'm gonna be thanking once again Jo for this presentation, and we really hope that you can participate either on the next sessions or as a speaker again. That will be awesome. And I'm gonna allow Francisco now to be the. Let me unmute you for a second. But before that, sorry, Jo, do you have anything else that you would like to say before finishing this section, this presentation?
Thank you for the splendid questions, everybody. I've made a note of them, and I'll certainly be using them to develop all of this stuff. As you could tell, that was like totally put together for the last week or two, and so I was really grateful to have the opportunity to do that, and look forward to staying in touch with anybody who would like that.